Hello, I'm Walt Bartman. I'm the founder and director of the Yellow Barn Studio at Glen Echo, and we're doing a instructor interview with Allie Morgan today. And this will give you an opportunity to get to know Allie. She's one of our outstanding instructors. She teaches drawing and painting, mostly focused on colored pencils and watercolor. Uh, and she does teach a drawing course. So I think that, you'll get to know a little bit about her. She's going to talk about her work. But one of the things I'm going to tell you is all the teachers that we have at the Yellow Barn are exceptional. And Allie fits the bill. She's wonderful, okay? And someone you would really enjoy studying with. Hello, Allie, how are you?
I'm great, Walt. Thank you so much for having me. I'm very excited about this interview.
It's a pleasure. It's a pleasure having you. And, I think it's going to it's a great opportunity for people just to get to know who you are and a little bit about yourself. So I'm going to ask you to tell me some things. First of all, start with what are you, what are you about? Who are you?
Well, I'm local. I grew up in Albany, Maryland, went to high school there. I ended up going to college in Salisbury University, so close to the Eastern Shore. It was great. I studied under Jinchul Kim, figurative oil painter. Kind of thought that's what I was going to do. Ended up going to grad school right out of college. I went to Arizona State University and totally went out of that. I became a watercolor painter focusing on animals. It was a great experience. It really taught me about trying to find my honesty in my work. Who am I? Why do I paint? What makes me tick with my work? I feel that that's the way that you can really, besides being honest with yourself, be honest with your audience, and it makes you more real. It makes your art more real. So I did grad school there. It was a great experience. And then I came back to Maryland. And for the past 6 years, I was teaching in a private high school, studio art and art history. And then just this past year, I started with Yellow Barn, and it's been a great experience so far.
Yeah, it's terrific. And I think, people are going to see the quality of your work. It's outstanding. I feel, uh, you look young, of course. All right. So, people would perhaps maybe think, oh, maybe you're just starting out or whatever. But truthfully, you've got an audience and you're very popular and you're an excellent teacher. And I would, maybe tell us a little bit about your teaching and what brought you to teaching.
Yeah. So when I graduated from college or from graduate school, I wasn't really sure what I wanted to do. I thought I would go straight into art making, but I ended up speaking to a couple of my professors and they were recommending teaching. And so I decided to, put the feelers out there, and I got into high school teaching, and I just had a blast with it. I was a little nervous about teaching that age group at first, because it was my first time working with them, but it was so much fun. The kids were so excited to learn, so willing to learn, and it was such a different experience. And so I really grew to have a love of teaching through that. Um, and especially teaching art, and this high school I was working at was all boys too. So art was not always the most popular subject, but once the kids got really into it, it was so much fun. And we'd be playing music and we'd be painting and having these philosophical discussions. It was a blast. And so now working with the Yellow Barn, I've been wanting to work with a different type of a student that was a little bit more mature, a student who was coming from a different place as opposed to the high school students. So it's been really fun kind of seeing where that education sort of, takes you, and where your teaching kind of goes from there.
Yeah, and that this is one of the things, I've been in this business teaching for 50 years and I taught high school too. So I know exactly what you're talking about, and honestly, now, which is a surprise, is that I have high school students who come back and study with me 30 years later.
That is
Right?
amazing. I love that.
Yeah, so that's one of the things I can tell you, especially with Zoom now. And we're doing our classes on Zoom. So how do you like doing your classes on Zoom?
Oh my gosh, Zoom is amazing. If there's anyone out there watching who is hesitant about it, maybe you're not as computer savvy or you're just not sure how it's going to translate the painting and the drawing through the computer screen. It really is a very easy technique and material to work with. All of my students were nervous about it at first, but it's gone great since then. We're able to do critiques. I'm able to help students specifically with their own drawings using Photoshop and other editing tools to help them with proportions and accuracy. I'm able to zoom in on my drawings. I can slow down the class. And the best part is we record the class. And then afterwards on my YouTube, I play them there and students can go back and watch them at any time. So
Yeah.
it really, I think it's almost better than teaching in person.
I totally agree with you. I think that, you know, I just walked right from my cup of coffee over to my studio, and, you know, I don't have to face any traffic jams or whatever. And it is terrific that way. And we are teaching a different audience now. We're getting people from all over. And I think that's just not people in the local community. We will go back to the Yellow Barn. Our plans, if everything goes well, is September. All right. Full, you know, or people who want to run classes in the Yellow Barn will be able to do that, but also the fact that we'll be running Zoom classes as well. There's no doubt. And, you know, I think that's one of the things at the Yellow Barn. We're going to start our shows here coming up in May. So anybody watching this, we'll be able to see some of the shows starting up as well. Let me ask you a question. We're going to take a look at your work. So maybe you can tell me a little bit about the work before we just review it.
Sure.
As to how you've, you know, you talked about your background and where you went to school and your influences. So maybe give us a little bit more background about what your work.
Yeah. So the majority of the work that I'm showing is going to be my grad school work and pretty much past that. So none of the college stuff. It is figurative, but more of it is animal based. You will see some self-portraits in there, but all of them include kind of this animal perspective. The work is, it's taken so many kind of twists and turns over the past couple of years, but it comes down to this relationship between humans and non-human animals. In graduate school, I became really interested in the philosophies of Jacques Derrida, and he talks a lot about this divide that separates man and animal, and what is permeable between them. And through my classes and through my discoveries in grad school, I thought a lot about it. And for me, it was companion animals, specifically dogs. I found a lot of, they almost became this creature that was in between human and in between animal. And I was really interested in this conversation. And as you can see behind me, there are a lot of dogs going on. I remember one of my professors in grad school said, you know, Allie, you need to paint something that is important to you. And this is when I was just in my figurative work. And it was really difficult to hear that because I thought my figurative work was important to me. But I took a lot of time and I just kind of thought to myself for a while, and I just wrote and I sketched, and I was like, well, what makes me me? And what it came back to was animals. I've always painted animals since I was little, especially dogs. I've always had kind of a connection to dogs. And so it felt so second nature to go back to dogs and making that kind of this focus of my work, especially my relationship with dogs. As we go into some of the more specific images, I'll tell you little stories about each of them, but they also deal with growing up in a Catholic family and dealing with animal positions in Christianity versus the humanity positions in Christianity. I was very interested in that. And then towards the end of the work, you're going to see a bit of a shift. The work becomes a little bit more somber, perhaps a little bit more quiet. My father, he passed away last June, and it was really difficult on all of us. It was after a 10-year battle with cancer. And so my work has become a little bit more introspective. It's now dealing more with memories, with loss, with dealing with grief. And I'm still using animals as a metaphor and as my language to communicate that. So I'm excited for you all to see the work.
Well, you know, it sounds similar to Andrew Wyeth, because when his father passed away, he took color out of his palette. And that was very interesting how this, you know, you see these kinds of things in your life and the impact they have, you know, and I think that's just the way life is. I mean, it's the way we have to deal with things. I'm not sure, but do you have a dog?
I do have a dog. She's not here at the moment. She might pop in at some point. She is in some of the images around, and I think she's in one or two of the paintings we're going to look at. So I'll point her out.
So this is it. I'm a dog person too, by the way.
Oh,
I
good.
went from Saint Bernards, all right,
Oh, mm-hmm.
to little. We have a King Charles right now, one of those little spaniels, you know. So it's,
Perfect.
and she's the cutest. So it's really interesting how you do that. Um, okay, so as a teacher, when you're
Mhm.
working with students, what is it that you want from your students?
I want my students to not be afraid. When I work with watercolor in particular, I have a lot of students who come to me saying that they work with acrylic, they do pastels, they do oils. But watercolor has always intimidated them. They're worried that they can't make mistakes, that they can't change anything. And so with my teaching, I try to almost force my students to make mistakes because I think that's the best way that you learn. With watercolor, if you make mistakes, there are so many ways we can fix it. You can do a mixed media piece, you can add more things to it, you can take things away. And you never know that through mistakes, you can often find deeper meaning in your work. It can take your work to new places maybe you weren't aware of before. So I hope my students gain confidence in their mistakes. And I want my students to find their truth. Like how I found my truth in the dogs, I want students to find their truth and whatever their truth is. That's what I
Yeah,
hope.
you know, that I think that's you know, that's a nurturing kind of attitude for students, and I think that everybody here can see how comfortable you are, and I'm sure being in your class, your students have that that boils over to them. So I think that it's it's important for them to understand that. I think everyone that's listening to this video, we have a really outstanding teacher here, and one of the reasons we're doing the videos is so you will get to know them and hopefully study with Allie for sure. All right. I think she has a great career ahead of her, and she's an exceptional artist. So right now we're going to go to looking at your paintings. All
Okay.
right. And what I'd like you to do is just talk a little bit about them.
Okay.
Um, you know, uh, what the work is about. I'm going to go to the PowerPoint, which is here. You should be seeing a PowerPoint, correct?
Hmm.
Okay. And let's go to the slideshow and play from the start.
All right.
Okay. And this is one of Allie's pieces there. We're going to um, take a look at this, the group of work. So the first one we have here
Mhm.
is you and a pack of hyenas, it looks like.
These were African wild dogs. So this was kind of my turning point piece in graduate school. This was one of my first watercolor pieces. And it's funny when I do watercolor, because I was trained in oils, I just think oils when I do them. So I don't know necessarily if I paint like a watercolorist, but with this painting, I wanted to break down the barrier, again, this idea between human and non-human animals. And I wanted a similar color palette between the groupings of the figures. So I have this piece is called The Pack, and it's a set of these African wild dogs, and they're all interacting with each other. And then we have the gaze between myself, the one dog, and then the dog on the on the other side. And we're sort of having this silent communication. Well, all these other dogs are in the front. Um, Over towards the left side of the piece, they're running towards this carcass that these other dogs are fighting between. And I just wanted to break down the barriers, these sort of mental barriers we have between human and an animal, and what makes us the same and what makes us this different. And especially with this piece, I wanted to portray myself nude as a way to, again, to break that barrier down. Derrida famously says, um, I'll take it back, actually, do a little story. He has a story in his book where he talks about, and this is, the book is called The Animal That Therefore I Am, also known as The Animal That Therefore I Am Following. And he talks about this little black cat he used to have, and it was a female cat. And he talks about how one day when he gets out of the shower, he's naked, and this cat is just staring at him, and he feels ashamed, and he's not sure why he feels ashamed because the cat doesn't wear clothes. The cat doesn't know what shame is, but he does. And so I thought about this idea of shame and nudity versus nakedness. And so I wanted to put myself into this situation. It was the first time I painted myself in this way. So I felt very vulnerable as well. And so I was kind of wrestling those ideas, and also the idea of the nude female among these pack of dogs. Dogs are often masculinized, while the female is obviously more feminine. So it opened up a lot of doors for me, this piece. It asked a lot of questions that I was really excited to explore in future paintings.
And there are a number of things going on here, and I'm going to ask you some questions.
Yeah.
You see yourself as a conceptual painter.
Yes.
Yeah. So I think that that's one of the things that people have to understand. How do you come up with your ideas?
Yeah. So the ideas usually start as thumbnails, really small sketches where I just scribble kind of marks. And a lot of times the ideas themselves come from articles that I read, books that I'm reading. Again, I'm very interested in human animal relationships. So I like to read um, anthropology, stories about them. I like to read philosophy, books kind of again about this sort of subject matter. And I think about in relationship to wild versus domesticated, again, human versus non-human animals, male versus female. And then with this sort of a composition, obviously there's nothing in the background. There's not really a foreground. There's no real ground to speak of. It's these figures and they're all kind of floating in this space. To me, this space is empty, but it's also quite full. It's almost like a scientific book, a scientific textbook, where we're looking at these figures and nothing else really seems to matter. It's about this communication between these figures and how they relate to one another, and almost not really inviting the audience in. It's more of a study about who these figures are.
What's interesting, Allie, and I think it's something similar to what Degas it was very good at, and that is he could put a figure on a white sheet of paper and it was standing.
Hmm.
And these pieces do stand on this white sheet of paper. And
Yeah.
one of the things that I get when I look at the piece, and I don't know if this was their intention, but there is a certain sense of innocence because of all the white space. White
Hmm.
space is almost a sense of purity, and in some respects for me as the viewer.
Yeah.
And what I mean is it's authentic and
Mhm.
has a very interesting feel. The scale relationship. How did you choose the scale relationship in this piece?
This piece, I just wanted to create motion. I wanted to create this feeling that even though we have these dogs and this figure, that was almost like they were the same species interacting. So I wanted them all to be relatively the same size. And I wanted them to dance around the picture plane, almost creating this oblong circle, the sort of oval shape where your eye could follow the group from the left through the figures in the front, and then as they wrap around to the figures in the back, and you kind of keep making this circle. I wanted to almost feel like a dance between the figures, and like we're catching this sort of this moment, this ritual between these figures as they interact all together.
Yeah, and I think that that's really felt. One of the things I like about the piece is that the figure, okay, you, all right.
Hmm.
If you were on your hands and knees
Hmm.
or on your legs and arms, in other words, like the dogs, you would be the same size as they are.
Yes.
You feel like you're towering over the group of wild dogs here, you
Yeah,
know?
it was really important to not have the figure be taller than the dogs because they would then make the figure as superior,
Mm.
and to lower yourself. I don't want to say lower yourself to your level. That doesn't come out right, but to be on the same level as the dogs and to be looking at the dog and have that dog be looking back to you, that silent conversation, it puts us on equal planes. And like Derry that talked about this divide, I think this piece, or at least my intention with this piece, was to try to narrow that divide as much as possible.
Yeah, and you did a wonderful job with this piece. Okay, so we'll go on to the next one.
Okay.
How about this one?
Ah, okay. So this is Freya. This was a dog that I met in graduate school, and she became a bit of my muse for me. So while I was working on these paintings of the figure alongside the wild dogs, I was creating these large scale paintings of just dogs. This was a mixed media piece. I believe this painting was about 35 inches tall by 60 some inches long. And it was a big stretch for me because I had to stretch this piece of paper, and I ended up stretching on the wall. And it was one of my first kind of times really stretching with the paper. So it was a big learning experience. But this dog in particular, I wanted to capture this communication between the gaze of the dog and our gaze back as the viewer. Again, this dog was pretty much life size, the drawing. It is a watercolor piece with colored pencils and pens. And again, this large white space that I almost wanted the dog to kind of fade into, but then pull forward from, almost like she's fluctuating between the artwork and then our present physical realm. And this piece, what I love about this image in particular is that I wanted to show that emotion of that dog that's waiting for you, and that dog that is thinking about your return. And you perhaps thinking about your return back to this dog. And two, while this is a dog, I wanted this dog to transcend dog and to become this sort of othered figure, this being that we relate to and that we can again have this sort of conversation with. And this was a pretty large piece for me again, and I loved it when I worked on it. It really spoke to me, and it became kind of again another jumping off piece for these large scale dog portraits that I used in my shows.
Again, here's that white space.
Yeah.
And you position the dog on the far left.
Hmm.
Is there, I mean, whenever someone goes to choose to put something somewhere in the rectangle, you know, it is a challenge to put it in the right place. It just seems so appropriate where you've
Yeah.
placed it.
Well, with the light coming in from her left side, our right side, I wanted to have a lot of openness to that side, almost like it's a thought bubble. What is she thinking about? What is, again, this conversation that we're having? And it's almost like that conversation is occurring on the right side of that picture plane. This white space, it's interesting to me. I've had a lot of people ask, like, well, why don't you do a background? Why don't you put this dog in a set or a scene? And to me, I'm like, I feel like it just takes away from it. It's not about this physical dog. It's about something more for me. And if I put the dog in a scene, sometimes I feel like it takes it away and it turns it into a dog portrait. When for me, it's more than a dog portrait. It's something deeper. The dogs became also pretty important for me. I want to talk a little bit about kind of the spirituality behind this piece. So I grew up Catholic, and um, when I was kind of coming to terms with, again, painting dogs in graduate school, because it still always felt kind of silly to me, like, oh, I'm just painting dogs. I think back to when I was in my religion classes, and I was always really bothered when the priests would say that the dogs or the animals, we'll just say animals, couldn't go to heaven, and that it was only placed for the humans. And I remember when I was little, I spoke to the priest and I said, I just don't think that's right. I can't believe that my dog is not going to go to heaven. He's perfectly friendly. Why can't he go?
Yeah.
And the priest eventually, after I pestered him enough, honestly, he was like, Allie, heaven is what you want it to be. So if you want your dog there, he'll be there. And I was like, that is such a lame response. That is such a lame excuse for that. And I just could never get past that. Obviously, you can tell I'm getting a little flustered by that statement. So with these dogs, whatever your religion is, I'm trying to elevate them. I'm trying to show people how I see these animals as being spiritual figures when it comes down to it, almost like they're icons in a way, these saintly figures.
Yeah, you give this presence, and the Dutch, when they use symbolism, the Dutch symbolist paintings,
Mm-hmm.
the dog was always an important part of the painting, and the reason is that the dogs could hear, but they couldn't speak.
Yes.
That was the thing behind the Dutch symbolist part of it. So dogs are much brighter than we give them credit for, because
Yes.
they don't have vocal cords, of course, or whatever. I think
Mm-hmm.
whatever it is that they can make them,
Yeah.
at least what I understand, I'm not sure. But you do bring a presence here that I think is very powerful, and especially the stare. You really captured that connection between
Mm-hmm.
the eyes. There's so much communicated in the eyes to begin with,
Yeah.
and that's what the viewer is getting from your piece here. The next piece.
Mm-hmm. Oh, this one is my heart. Okay. So this painting was called A Face of God. And this was part of a triptych. So this, in my graduate thesis show, this painting was, I believe, about 65 inches wide by about 65 inches tall. So it's essentially a square. And this was in the center. So you walked into the gallery, and on the far back wall, you had this large painting. To the left of it was a large black lab staring at you, and to the right of it was a large portrait of me. And these paintings were unframed, and I had them mounted with magnets on the back of them. So they essentially just floated off these white walls. And it was so beautiful. It was so like quiet and solemn in a way. And again, it just felt very spiritual for me. This dog, his name was Jazz. He was my family dog growing up. He passed away while I was in grad school. I think when I finished this, he had just passed away. So it was really important for me. This is another mixed media piece. This was a watercolor piece, and then with pens and colored pencils on top. And what I was really trying to show here was, this for me was a portrait. I wanted to capture this dog, but as an older man. I wanted you to look at this figure and not think necessarily a dog, but think this is a wise person. This person has a lot of stories that they could share us, and he's looking at our soul, and I am looking at his soul. And the blue and the orange, again, I was trying to play up a little bit more, having a little more fun with the colors here. Blue was really important at this point of my work. I used it a lot in my darker colored dogs. Blue, interestingly enough, is, besides being a holy color, again, dealing with Christianity, it often represents the color of nothing and the color of infinite or infinity. And to put that in the dog, it felt so right, again, with this large white space that also was kind of this infinite space. I just wanted it almost be like this dog that goes on forever, and we can relate to this figure and it can relate to us.
And there's an artist by the name of Olaf Host,
Mm-hmm.
Host, and he's a Danish artist who in my work, I use a quote from him. He said, have a romance with your subject. And you do. I mean, it's very important that people understand how much how powerful these images are to you. And I think that this is one of the things that you convey in the work very, very well. I mean, it's really sophisticated in the way your mastery of the technique and also the idea.
Yeah. It was tricky when I first started the subject, because when you say you paint dogs, there's some connotations with that. It's very simple sounding, and I really wanted to get away from that, and I wanted to elevate this idea of animal portraiture. What could it be? Where could it go? And I wanted to bring something to these dogs that maybe I don't see a ton of when I see animal portraits. I wanted to elevate them in a way, and again, I think the reason why these pieces, well, at least I hope they speak to other people, is, again, I found my truth when I painted these. I found what made me tick and what was important to me, what was my voice. And I think when you find that as a student and you're able to nurture that, your work will really sing for others, and other people who may not like dogs in this case, but will hopefully understand what I'm trying to get out with it, and they'll be able to relate to it in a way maybe they wouldn't have related to it before.
Yeah, and I think that this is, you convey this really, really well. I mean, when we look at your work, the power in your work. So here's the series that you were talking about as well, right?
Yeah. So this series I called Girls, and this was, besides talking about, again, the human and animal relationship, I wanted to talk about gender issues and specifically dealing with the female form. I painted several of these myself, along with a white pit bull. I wanted it to be a white dog because, well, I'm very pale. And so I thought having those color similarities would be interesting. And again, sticking on that white background, it's so minimal. But I think in that minimal aspect, it speaks volumes. I tried to position the dog and the animal in similar positions, again, to kind of play up the similarities between the two, the balance between the two. So we do have sort of the symmetrical composition going on. And I wanted to portray these figures in a way that wasn't for the historical male gaze. I wanted to view them almost in a female gaze, in a gaze that was not sexual, but in a gaze that was understanding. if that makes sense.
You know, this is very similar to Wyeth as well. I see a lot of Andrew Wyeth in your work, whether you
Mhm.
realize it or not. And one of them is just exactly what you have here. Wyeth always liked to put a duality in a piece where he might have a window and then have a metal hanger hanging from a little hook. All
Yeah,
right. And you ask yourself, what is the narrative here? You know, it's sort of like Hopper. Hopper did the same thing. It was a kind of a mystery. All right.
yeah,
And so you're trying to make ideas from this as to what the purpose, because it doesn't speak specifically of, like you're petting the dog. All right.
right.
So you really get this. And then when you look at the poses, the dog is certainly feels a little bit more emotion. And I
Hmm.
think but the design is terrific, and it works so beautifully on this white paper as well. Again, it's and where you in both cases, the dog and the figure, you can feel the distribution of weight on that white paper, so you really
Hmm.
capture that feeling.
Yeah.
How many times? Let me ask you a question. A piece like
Mhm.
this. You start out with a sketch, maybe in a sketchbook, right? Or
Yeah.
what do you do? And do you have a picture of a dog in that pose, or do you have a dog pose for you, or you just invent the pose?
Well, it's kind of a combination of everything. Usually, when I start these pieces, I have an idea of what I want to portray. So, with this one, I did have this idea of the figures kind of on their backs and having this perspective of looking kind of from the head and down. Um, for the dog, so I was working at the time when, or it was actually before the time I was painting this, I was working with a dog rescue. And this dog in particular was a dog that I worked with. And I got to know her. And so when I have the opportunity to work with dogs, especially like if it's not my dog or a dog that I know, I film them and I take as many pictures as possible. And I try to capture their movements and their energy as best as I can. And in this piece particular, this was a watercolor painting. And so as I painted, I just tried to remember back to how she moved and the energy she had when she moved. And in the painting of myself, my image is much less, there's a lot less movement here. It's more just watching her as she is kind of doing her thing. Both of these are photo reference, but at the time when I was photographing the dog in particular, like I said, I was really trying to pay attention to the movements. And when I started painting this piece, I did draw it, and then I ended up erasing a good portions of it, and I just let the paint kind of do what it wants to do. And that's what I think one of the beauties of watercolor is you just let the paint kind of fall around the form,
Mhm.
and it almost just comes alive through it. I don't really know how best to describe it, but um, yeah, I use lots of different things when I come up with these images.
Yeah, the thing that I see that is really unique here, maybe you can speak to it. Maybe uh, I'm hoping in a way that this is something that perhaps maybe you probably thought about when you positioned these figures, but
Mhm.
you have this bridge that you form between
Yeah,
the two, all right? And this bridge composition is two verticals with a horizontal connecting them, all right?
yeah,
And you feel the two vertical the figures, okay, even though they're on their backs,
mhm,
they read vertically, okay?
yes,
And then you see this where the two arms are coming together, and I think you form that U in the middle. Was
mhm.
there an intention for that, or did it just happen this way?
It kind of happened this way, but I will say I think subconsciously I always go back to that Derrida quote talking about this divide. And in this piece, there is still a divide. There is still a separation between human and non-human animal. Um, it's interesting in this series of the figure with the dogs, I never have them touching. Um, I think it's again subconsciously there's something there about there's still this separation. How do we breach that separation? Is it possible even to breach it? And I think that's one of the things I like about painting something like this is that it asks questions more than it answers questions.
Mhm.
And so to leave that sort of open U shape, I think in a way it leaves it open for the audience to come to their own conclusions about what it means and what fills that space.
Yeah, now going back to the watercolor,
Hmm.
now that you've really focused on watercolor, I know that you said you went through different mediums, but it seems to me that this is something that the medium has, it speaks for you.
Yeah.
Uh, did that happen? And when do you remember it happening, in other words?
Yeah, I was in grad school. That's when I switched over from oil paints to watercolors. And I really thought I was going to be a diehard oil painter. I mean, I thought I was going to get married to that material and we were going to live happily ever after. But I had some watercolors. A professor gave me a couple kind of to play with. And when I was just figuring out what I was doing, I remember thinking, okay, well, I'm just going to go sit outside and just paint what I see. And in Tempe in Arizona, where I was living, there are tons of rabbits. And so I remember sitting outside painting the rabbits. And the rabbits were really fast. And so I had to use watercolor because it was quick. And I remember thinking, well, what if I took this watercolor and I painted it in a way that necessarily didn't really look like a rabbit, but it was the essence of the rabbit. It was what a rabbit feels like. And to me, a rabbit is a fast heartbeat. It looks at you for a second and then it runs off. And then it kind of clicked with me. My professor in undergrad, Jinchul Kim, he taught us, he was from South Korea, and he taught us traditional calligraphy painting. And he taught us about sumi painting and how to grind the ink and the philosophy behind that. And I realized what I was doing was kind of what he had spoke to us about, was that when you're doing sumi painting, it's often not about painting a bird so that it looks like a bird. It's about painting the soul of that bird. And if you paint the soul of that bird, it will look like that bird. So when I was painting these rabbits, I think subconsciously I was kind of going back to that idea of they're not really about painting rabbits. It's about painting the soul of this rabbit. And again, this soul kind of going back to that, do the rabbits go to heaven kind of thing. And it was all clicking for me, all kind of making sense. And so the watercolor just felt so ethereal for me. It felt very quick, but also in this case, when I look at the dog, some of those marks, it felt very slow, felt kind of minimal. And I thought where oil takes several hours, several days to dry, because you have to wait in between while things, dry on the canvas, watercolor could be so much quicker. And watercolor, in a way, to me, was a little bit more honest, and it was a little bit more naked. It was a bit more vulnerable. And I felt that as a material, it worked better for what I was saying with my work.
You're a master at it at a young age. I mean, I'm really impressed. I taught watercolor years ago when I first started teaching at Montgomery
Hmm.
College. So I know a little bit about it. And I think I'm looking at the way you're handling the material and how simple everything is. I mean, this
Hmm.
minimalistic way of working where you're not really solidifying things with like in your figure.
Yeah.
The hair is solidified, but that's because of the focus. You just know exactly where to do it. It's really
Hmm.
beautiful.
Oh, thank you.
So here's
Mm,
one of your self
yeah,
portraits with a dog.
exactly. So this was with that same dog in the last piece. And in this one, I wanted the gaze to be on the viewer now. So in the last piece, it was the communication between just the dog and the figure. And truthfully, the audience wasn't really invited. The audience could look, but it was almost kind of voyeuristic. In
Mhm.
this one, there's a confrontation occurring. We have the confrontation between the figure, the female figure, and the audience itself. And then the dog is looking at the figure and is not necessarily looking at the viewer. So like when I look at this piece, I immediately look to the human, the female figure, because that's where we have our connection. And then I look over at the dog and then back at the human and back to myself. And what I liked about this piece and what I was trying to talk about again was bring a little bit more gender into this and talk about the role of the gaze. And again, in art history, especially European art history, the female figure in the male gaze. And I wanted to create almost like an Olympia kind of having this confrontational look to the viewer that is not sexualized. And again, but it does kind of have a voyeuristic feel, and it's vulnerable once again because it's dealing with nudity or nakedness. But sticking with a similar color palette between the two figures. And again, this relationship between human and animal. And you know, we look back at art history. I was in a couple art history classes, and specifically, they were animal-based art history classes in grad school. We talked a lot about the female form, and often how the female form is seen as more animal. There's more bestial qualities to it. A lot of comparisons with feline figures. So I was kind of thinking about all those things as I painted this piece. And again, I wanted it to be different from that last piece because I really wanted that gaze to come through and invite the audience in, but in a bit more of a standoffish way.
And this piece would take a lot of courage, wouldn't it?
Oh, yes, it took a lot of courage. I was nervous about posting this on social media for a long time, but it did.
I don't know what your influences are with artists. Maybe you might speak about that. But you know, Alice Neal at age 80 did a nude self-portrait, and you know, the same thing here. You get you know, especially a female. Male can kind of do it without really feeling as if it's you know, somewhat inappropriate. But in a way, the female really becomes I guess when I look at it, you know, there's more innocence there, right? And for you to put your image out like that would take that kind of courage. When you showed this piece, how did people respond?
You know, really well, actually. You know, I was really nervous because I remember when I painted these, I was really nervous to show my parents at the time because I was just like, oh, man, what are they gonna think? But and this was too, I painted this after teaching high school because I could never, when I was teaching high school, I could never really display these type of pieces because you just never know, you know, where things could go. But this piece, honestly, it gave me so much freedom. I felt like I could finally do what was right and what I needed to do so that my artwork and my message, my voice really came out. I felt almost when I was just painting the dogs that it wasn't far enough, that I wasn't being 100% honest with myself about what I was trying to say. And I had to be vulnerable. I had to show myself in this. I remember my mom even said at one point, she was like, you know, does it have to be you? And I said, yes, it has to be me. For this to be real, it has to be me.
Yeah. And we're talking about influences. Are there any artists that, you know, you have that are influential on you?
Several. One of my professors in grad school, still so influential to me, Anthony Pestler. He does tempera as well as oil paintings, and he paints animals as saintly icons. Beautiful, beautiful work. He brings a lot of spirituality to the work and take a lot of influence kind of from that. As an artist who uses a lot of these large white spaces, George Berugi is another one. He does a lot of large scale paintings dealing with the environment and the future of the environment, animals in very provocative poses, almost human-like. Very, very interesting work. Love the work of Laura Ball, another watercolorist. She creates these dream-like pieces, again, on white spaces of these animals that are almost like mandalas in a lot of ways. They're formed out of other animals' bodies, and they're twisting on themselves, and they're eating each other. And it's beautiful, and it's grotesque in a way. And again, it has kind of this surrealist element. Very interested in works like that. I could go on and do several, but a lot of artists that I'm really interested in these days are artists who use large white spaces and that have an interest in animals as well as the environment and humanity's role within the world's kind of space there.
Yeah, you have this ability to create this eye contact. The eye plays an important part in your work. And even in the first piece, those small little animals, you really got the feeling of their eyes. And I think that's one of the strengths that you have with your work, how important that is.
Hmm.
And there's a lot more communicated that way. You
Yeah.
know, we can read into your soul by
Hmm.
looking at your eyes. So you get that feeling between these two figures, particularly. I love it.
Yeah.
I think the next one.
Oh, okay. So you asked earlier about my dog. This is her. This is Zelda. This is my dog, and this is a colored pencil piece. This piece, I was, so this one I painted in the pandemic. Actually, the last three pieces you saw have all been pandemic pieces. And this one, I was looking for joy. I wanted to create this moment that this dog has, that hopefully something we can all relate to, where you take a deep breath and you release it. And that kind of moment of peace and tranquility is what I was trying to capture here. Um, I, at this point, I wasn't doing a ton of color pencil work. So a lot of this was kind of experimentation for me. And as you saw in previous works, I don't do a ton of backgrounds. So I really wanted to do something a little different here and put in a negative space that was almost dreamlike, a little bit more surreal, and put this dog in a location that was different from, again, those large kind of empty white spaces for me. So this was a bit of a kind of a sidestep, but a really fun piece to do.
Yeah, and speak a little bit about the colored pencil because you know you're one of our instructors that works with colored pencil, and people it's becoming more and more popular. Just like
Mhm.
the gouache, I teach a gouache class, and it's always full. People want to learn how to use it, and then when they do learn how to use it, they don't want to go back to oils. They want to stay with the gouache. And I
Yeah.
think, how about the colored pencil? Because we see a lot of drawing classes, but they never get into color.
Yeah. So color is its own beast, right? When you're doing a color or drawing class, it's often wise to kind of start with black and white imagery first. But with colored pencil, it just opens up the world to new possibilities. We talk about color relationships in my class. We talk about canceling out colors. For example, in this dog, there's a lot of orange tones at the bottom. And I'm a big proponent of adding as much color into these pieces as possible. I love color. So I tell my students when we're working, really squint at your reference photo and pull out colors, even though if they may be kind of minimal, pull it out, go a little bit more exaggerated with it. We can tone it back by layering. Colored pencils are just like oils. They're just like watercolors. It's about layering and blending and building up the materials. And so if you feel comfortable with oil paints, with acrylics, it's exactly kind of, well, I don't say exactly, but it's very similar in the process. I find colored pencils to be really accessible too. People start oftentimes really young doing colored pencils. You start as a kid, and I find it to be one of those materials that oftentimes you put away for material that's a bit more academic, like oil painting, like acrylic painting, kind of thinking that that's the next step up to be more professional. But there are fabulous color pencil artists out there. And like Walt, you were saying, we have a couple other color pencil teachers at the Yellow Barn who do beautiful, beautiful work. Color pencil can be elevated just like painting can, and you can get so many beautiful things out of it. Like in this piece, we have soft blends that you can get through adding different mediums. You can use rubbing alcohol. You can use paint thinners to actually melt the wax and the binders and the color pencils to almost paint with the color pencils. And then in the dog's fur, you can create that texture. It's a really fun kind of eye-opening material that I think a lot of people, perhaps when they started, aren't sure where it can go. And so when you show your students and you say, okay, well, this, is what we can do with it, I think there's a level of excitement there. You're like, oh, I can go back to this material that I did when I was younger, and it's so much more fun.
And you don't have to, I mean, you can put it in your pocket. You've got uh, something that's not going to get all over, first of all, like paint,
Oh,
but then the others, you have the pencils. So it isn't
yes,
always,
your cleanup is fabulous. Your
yeah.
cleanup is great. You don't have to worry about keeping your paints wet. It's fabulous.
But it's something that you could take on a trip like to Venice,
Oh,
and
mm-hmm,
use, and I think that this is one of the things. So people would think about it, think about taking a colored pencil course. I
mm-hmm.
think this is real important. And
Yeah.
then this particular piece.
Okay. So this Okay, this is an interesting piece for me. I painted this one again. Actually, all the rest of the paintings we're going to see from now on are also all pandemic pieces. This painting is called A Funeral for a Crow, and I painted this about 2 weeks before my dad passed away. We knew that it was coming, and it was very, very difficult. I was seeing him as much as I could. Again, pandemic times, it was not the easiest time to be going through something like this. And it was a real struggle for myself, my family. And I didn't know what to do with my feelings and my emotions about the whole thing. So I found great comfort in taking walks. After I would, spend time with my family, I would come home and I would just walk. I would walk in our neighborhood, and we have woods in our neighborhoods, and I would watch the animals. And was, I remembered this incident when I was back at Arizona that involved crows, and I was waiting for a bus, and I saw a crow get hit by a car, and another crow swooped down and sat with it in the middle of the road, and it was trying to move it, and eventually it did fly away. And it made me think, and I remembered that as I was taking these walks and seeing the birds and squirrels, I thought about it and I said, grief is a really interesting thing because we all deal with it in different ways, humans and non-human animals. Elephants, for example, scientists have found that elephants do hold funeral processions. If you have more than one dog and a dog passes away, oftentimes you'll see that dog will grieve, that cat will grieve. And so with this piece, I wanted to talk about how other creatures grieve. Crows are very, very smart birds, and we have seen similar things kind of happen with these birds where they do have this understanding of death. And so I wanted this piece to be relatable in that way, so that when we look at it, it is about sort of the death of this bird, but grief as a universal emotion that all creatures feel. And I wanted it to be more like it's almost like a little ritual, a little service happening right in the center of the piece with all the white space around them. The birds are rather small in the image, and we have one bird towards the left that's looking at us, almost questioning, why are we here? Are we paying tribute to this bird? Are we grieving for this bird as well? Or are we voyeurs? Are we just looking and wondering what is happening here? Yeah, this was a real important piece for me, and it was a real healing piece.
I'm going to tell you, it's a really powerful piece, and it's powerful in a lot of ways. The large white space makes everything feel smaller.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's one of them.
Yeah.
The interesting thing is, you mentioned your teacher was Korean,
Yes.
right? Asian art particularly does not have shadows in it.
Mm-hmm.
And was that an influence at all in you designing a piece like this, where you decided, no, we're not going to have shadows?
When I have shadows, it creates a ground, and it grounds these animals in a earthly sort of space, quote unquote, like a mortal kind of realm. So when I don't include shadows, to me, it makes these birds less about being birds and something more universal. It takes away their physical, and it makes them something, or at least I hope it makes them more spiritual. So to not incorporate shadows, it was a choice. And I do think I look at my work now, and I think one of the pieces we're going to look at in a little bit, I have a lot of interest in Japanese artwork, specifically of the Nihonga style. I am interested in kind of the minimal aspects of it. You're right, the lack of shadows. There's a simplicity to it, but also a deeper understanding and a complex emotion for nature, which I think comes out in these pieces.
And everybody looking at this piece has to realize that these birds weren't there all at once.
Correct.
You put these ideas together.
Yes.
And the bird's claw hang up there is such a statement, laying on its back and having the claw the way it is. I love it. I think it's these pieces are they're profound in a way that they touch us in their humanness,
Mhm.
you know, that the birds share a lot of how we feel. And I
Yeah.
think that that's what I'm seeing. So now we're into the,
Mm.
it's interesting. I'm watching your, progress through
Yeah.
these different animals. And now I've seen you go to fish.
I
So you're
know.
really in your fish period, right?
Yeah, it is my fish period. This one, it does visually, it makes a big jump from that last one. There is a background now, there's a little bit more kind of going on. So these paces have been made since my dad has passed away. And the fish paintings, again, they deal with grief, they deal with meditation. This fish in particular, I have painted a couple times now. This was a fish that I had a couple years ago. This is a betta fish. And I found a lot of comfort in small marks at this point, and I'm still finding a lot of comfort in this. This painting is a watercolor painting on a black acrylic background. These watercolors are Gansai watercolors. They are traditional Japanese watercolors, so they're more opaque. They're kind of like a gouache, but they act more like a watercolor, and they're kind of
What,
glossy.
what's their name again? Just so
Yeah. So these are called Gansai watercolors.
inside.
This brand is called Kuretake.
Mhm.
And um, and so when I've been working with these, I spend a lot of time using stipple marks. I found that that was a nice way to create texture with these pieces, as well as to create a blend with them. But I also found the stipple to be a very meditative kind of process for me. It allowed me to relax. I stopped thinking about grief when I was working on these, and I just made work. These pieces, in a way, were a bit more about the process for me. This painting is called Saint Elmo's Fire, and besides dealing with the meditation in this fish, I wanted to talk about kind of otherworldly aspects that bring it back to nature. So, St. Elmo's fire is a natural phenomenon that can occur during thunderstorms, where you get these distortions of light that occur kind of on like skyscrapers, or we would often see them on ships in the ocean. And it's like electrical currents, basically. And it reminded me as to a story that my dad told me, kind of about fire. This is going to sound crazy, but in Alney, there was this. Actually, it was more in Clarksville, so it was a little bit farther. But we used to drive to and from on Route 108, and there was a dump there. And at night, they would burn off the chemicals at this dump, and it created this large blue flame. And I don't know why that always stuck with me. And my dad would tell stories about the blue flame. And so as I worked on this, I kept thinking about this blue flame and how it had a very human, man-made, response to it, but it felt very spiritual. It felt kind of um, mystic in a way, otherworldly, supernatural. And so in the negative space with this piece, these colors, I wanted it to feel kind of supernatural, that this fish is almost this transcendent figure between um, the ordinary and this sort of supernatural space. So in a way, these paintings, besides dealing with grief, they deal about memories, they deal about loss, permanence. I have this gemstone down at the bottom, creating these reflections, and it's just kind of a new direction for the work. And I'm really excited about kind of where these are going.
What's interesting, was this painted on white paper?
This is painted on wood panel.
On a wood panel, and
Yeah,
it wasn't black to start with.
correct.
So it was a white surface, and then you had to get that really rich blackness that
Yes.
really is, it's almost like a Baroque painting, and that the really black dark areas are flat, and
Yeah.
then you have that modeling. It's a beauty, and like you said, you stippled it, so you must be working with small brushes.
Yes, very small brushes. And these take a lot of time. This one took several weeks to do. But again, throughout it was so calming. And at this point, I just needed calm in my life. And this felt calm as I worked on it. And then looking back at it now, though, I mean, I look at that negative space and those colors, and that doesn't really particularly feel calm to me. So it does have this kind of interesting duality to it.
Yeah, it's wonderful. And then this particular piece.
Oh, yes. So this painting I painted after that beta fish. This painting is called I Want to Be Well. And um, what I was looking for here, so this is painted with Gansai watercolors on a wood panel, and the wood panel is still coming through. Um, this painting in particular, I did take influence from Japanese paintings, Japanese historical paintings. I wanted to incorporate a bit more foliage with this, and I wanted to create this sort of surrealist space where we looked at this horse almost from a side view as well as a top-down view, kind of occurring at once. There is a tension in this piece that I feel is occurring right below the horse, where those plants interact with the horse's body. And I wanted to show a horse in a way that we don't normally see horses. In an equine painting, usually the horse is very majestic, it's standing on all fours and looking out either at the viewer or, in the naked space, or it's running, galloping. And this horse, a lot of people have said this painting felt joyful to them. When I look at it, it's not very joyful to me. To me, this horse is in a position that is very vulnerable. We're seeing this horse's genitalia. This is a female horse too. So again, I'm bringing gender a little bit more into it. And we're looking at a horse in a way that it shouldn't really be seen. For those of you who have been around horses, obviously this is a rolling horse, but if your horse lies down for too long, it can lead to different problems physically. So I wanted to show a horse that was perhaps off balanced and try to create a sense of peace in this piece, because like the painting said, the title, I Want to Be Well, I'm still searching for that, trying to get through these emotions of dealing with the grief and wanting to find peace with it.
And it's interesting, you're working on the wood. It's like Dick Blick sells those panels, those wood panels.
Yes,
It's a birch panel,
it
right?
is. Mm-hmm.
So that's something for people who are working in gouache, particularly, I guess. I didn't even think about painting gouache on wood, but truthfully, it would work beautifully.
Mm-hmm. It
So
would work
it's
really well, and
and
then you just seal it with wax on
uh-huh,
top, and then you can frame it like you would an oil painting, so you wouldn't even have to worry about glass or anything
okay.
with it.
So the wax, when you seal it with wax,
Yes.
how do you do that?
So I use coal wax. I believe the brand is Dorland's coal wax, and what it is you just take a clean cloth and you put the wax on it, and then you rub the wax into the panel. And it's amazing when you rub the wax into the panel. And I've done this with gouache pieces as well. That gouache, that watercolor is not going to go anywhere, so you don't have to worry about it smearing or anything. Um, and then so you just buff it in to the canvas or your panel. You let it dry, and then you can go back to it 24 hours later and buff it again to shine it. And it's a way to seal the piece and to varnish it, give it a bit more shine to it. And it's been working out well for me so far. So
That's great. The first I've seen something like that, and it's unique in a way because you don't think of this as a traditional surface to work on, but
yeah.
again, most of the egg temper paintings were painted on a wood panel.
Mm-hmm.
We have that. So this is the last piece.
Yes. So this is the most recent piece that I finished. This painting is called Cassiopeia, and this is a painting of a telescopic goldfish. And this type of a goldfish, so when you normally have fish, their eyes are, on the sides of their face, right? But with this breed of fish, the eyes are essentially bulging out and they're always looking upward. So these are fish usually used in ponds. So when you look down at them in the pond, they're always looking up at you. So in a way, this fish is looking up towards the heavens. This painting is again the watercolor, that's the fish. And then the black background is acrylic. And again, dealing with kind of that meditative state as I worked on it, kind of dealing with this sort of supernatural. I wanted to create this sort of ethereal quality to this fish, almost like this fish is in the night sky, again, looking up towards the heavens. And I wanted to create shine with this fish, more reflective quality, and kind of push my watercolor technique as far as I could go with it.
And I'm telling you, you're truly a master of what you do. I look at your patience, all right? I mean, this took a while, that's for sure. And
Hmm.
you can see the dot pattern, if you look really closely, that you like to use. You're getting a beautiful feel to it. Things feel very natural. I mean, you're a very descriptive painter, but at the same time, that it isn't about admiring something because it looks like it.
Hmm.
Right. This is one of the weaknesses, I think, in a lot of descriptive painters. They can
Hmm.
paint things the way they look. All
Right.
right. But they never go beyond that.
Yeah.
And all of your pieces speak, they're much deeper. They're psychological. And I
Hmm.
think that you can feel that in the way you put them in space and the handling, like in this particular one, the sense of the lighting and the shape that you're going after an interesting shape as well, which I
Hmm.
think speaks.
Yeah.
So, your work is incredibly strong. I'm totally impressed with this body of work. I
Oh,
really
thank
think
you.
it's unique. I think, as an artist, you really found your subjects that you really have a romance with. Everybody
Hmm.
can see that, and I feel it. So I want to thank you so much for sharing your thoughts with us tonight. I think that people are going to really benefit from this, review of your work and hear you speak about your teaching and that. And honestly, folks, you've got someone here that I think you should really seriously think about taking classes with. And Allie's somewhat new in our studio, so that's one of the reasons why the interview is important, so that you can kind of get to know her even more. So with that, I hope that you all, will sign up and take classes. I want to thank Allie again. Allie, do you have any last words before we go?
Well, I want to thank you, Walt, so much for taking the time to interview me. This was a lot of fun. And for any potential students out there who want to work with me, my classes, I try to keep it really fun in class. It's about conversation. I really want to get to know who you are as a painter, and whatever your goals are, I really want to help you to achieve them. I'm all about trying to find that truth, that honesty in your paintings, and whatever way I can help you do that, that's what I'm here for as your teacher. So please consider taking a class with me in the future.
Well, with that, folks, I want to say good night and thank you again, Allie. And this will be up on YouTube. And for anyone who's interested in classes, you can go to right now, glenechopark.org, because they're going to a new registration system. And that's where you can find her classes and sign up, because we're in our spring term right now, but we will be going to our summer term. So thanks again, Allie.
All
All
right.
right.
Thank you so much, Walt.
Have a good night.